July 7th or 8th, Tamal Krishna Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada again discuss initiations, and Prabhupada named 7, then 9 GBC men to initiate on his behalf. Since you will be detecting the change in my voice, let me first inform that yes, I was editing the video of this section. As I was editing the video of this section, I chose to redo it. And yes, the re-video is being made while I have COVID, which has given me a rougher voice, more shortness of breath, and I'm getting a bit weaker. So please just bear with me. Maybe a little bit I don't understand what I'm saying because of the voice, but it's because right now that I have COVID that I'm confined in my office, quarantined to my office, that I am trying to take advantage of this time to tackle the task of completing the editing of so many, many, many hours of long videos that I had made months ago. And once all the videos are finished editing, I still got a lot of work embedding everything onto my website, syncing up all the text and the graphics, effects, the user interfaces. I have a basic framework done, but it's in place, but it's still going to take some time before I can complete this and get it up online. But I'm trying to take advantage of whatever time I have to get this done. And the question will be whether anyone will ever take the time to even watch so many, not hours of videos, but literally days and days of videos. I pray enough devotees will, because my goal has been to make this as definitive, as complete, and all-encompassing as I can. What I've been trying to do, however, is to keep the timelines separate. I want to give arguments. I'm trying to give arguments about the May 28th meeting in that time frame. Then when it comes to the July 9th letter, I try to give the arguments for that in that timeline. But since the whole topic is all one topic and all the different evidences are interrelated, it can only be properly presented by pointing out how they are inseparably interlinked and related. But I also see the effectiveness of making a proper chronological timeline so that it helps, as we see it, it helps us keep a focus on what happened at this time. At this time, this took place. At that time, that took place. And that it gives us a better view of what actually took place, what actually happened, and so that we can reach the proper conclusion. So I understand the need for that. But there's so many times that I have to keep repeating the same arguments over and over because I made arguments on May 28th that the same arguments, many of them will be for July 9th and different timelines. And so I'm repeating so many of the same arguments again and again. So it makes the presentation a lot longer and more redundant. However, redundancy is not a bad thing. How many times, in so many different various ways, in Bhagavad Gita, has Krishna instructed that we are not this body, but we are an eternal soul? How many times has he taught that we should surrender to him and just worship him? He doesn't teach these things just one time and that's it and goes on. He repeats these messages over and over in so many different ways, and it is that redundancy that delivers the message most loud and clear. According to Tamal, this took place on July 8th. He bases the date on his diary entries. The BBT archives list the date of this recording as July 7th. The recording has several long pauses. Srila Prabhupada is speaking slowly. He's very weak. The tape is itself over 10 minutes long. After the tape completes, I will give my analysis. So let's listen.
Srila Prabhupada, we're receiving a number of letters now. There's people who want to get initiated. So, up until now, since you were becoming ill, we asked him to wait. That's what we were doing. I mean, formally we were, the local BBC sannyasis were chanting on the G, and they were writing to your divine grace, and you were giving a spiritual name. So should that process be resumed, or should we? I mean, one thing is that it's said that the spiritual master takes on the, you know, he takes on he has to cleanse the disciple by, so we don't want that you should have to, your health is not so good, so that should not be, that's why we've been asking everybody to wait. I just want to know if we should continue to wait some more time. No. So they should continue to research and learn to have mastery. Okay. You can do it. Absolutely. This is amazing. So supposing someone is in America, should they simply write directly to Kirtanananda or Satsuru? No. They don't. Jai Kirtan. Bhagavan. You can do it. Hare Krishna Maharaj. Would be right. Who's there? So, persons wouldn't have to write to your divine grace, they could write directly to that person. Actually, they're initiating the person on your divine grace's behalf. Those persons who are initiated are still your... initiation is that simple. This is for first initiation. Okay. And for second initiation, for the time being, they should... Then go ahead. Second initiation, that's illegal. Should... Some devotees are writing you now for second initiation, and I'm writing them to wait a while, because you're not well. So can I continue to tell them that? They then do second. By writing you? No. These men. They can also do second initiation. So there's no need for the devotees to write to you for first or second initiation. They can write to the man nearest them. But all these persons are still your disciples. Anybody who gives initiation is doing so on your behalf. Yeah. You know that book I'm maintaining of all of your disciples' names? Should I continue that? So if someone gives initiation like Hare Krishna, he should send the person's name to us here, and I'll enter it in the book. There's someone else in India that you want to do this?
India, is in India, Jayapataka.
Jayapataka Maharaj.
You are also in India.
Yes.
You can note down these names.
Yeah, I haven't. Kirtanananda Maharaj, Satsvarupa Maharaj. Kirtanananda Maharaj, Satsvarupa Maharaj, Jayatirtha Prabhu, Bhagavan Prabhu, Harikesha Maharaj, Jayapataka Maharaj, and Tamal Krishna Maharaj.
That now this is
7. There's 7.
all the time, 7 years.
Rameshwar Maharaj.
Vidara.
Oh, it's something.
So without working on me, whatever you consider the result, that will depend
On discretion. That's the first and second initiation.
This conversation starts with Tamal asking about the current backlog of devotees who have been recommended for initiation. I have come across a number of arguments regarding this recording as it relates to this issue. So let me deal with a few of them first and get them out of the way before I jump into the analysis. First of all, it's been pointed out that, yes, this conversation is all about the current backlog of initiations and how to address that while Srila Prabhupada was still present. And since this conversation began the effort that culminated in the writing of the July 9th letter, the argument is given that this provides positive proof that the Rtviks system outlined by the July 9th letter was in fact only intended by Srila Prabhupada to address the initiations while he was still present, and that the Rtviks system was not ever intended for after he departed. And of course, there is no disagreement that this specific conversation is only aimed at those current initiations at that time. However, this recording was not the only conversation that Srila Prabhupada held with Tamal as he developed and dictated the July 9th letter. There were a number of additional meetings. According to Gauridas Pandit Prabhu, he has said there were a number of meetings. And even according to Tamal's own diary, another meeting was held the very next morning. And according to Jasodanandan Maharaj's diary, he saw Tamal walking back into Srila Prabhupada's quarters on the evening of the 9th to further refine and complete the final writing of the letter, which Tamal informed him he was working on and told him that once it was completed, he would, and Prabhupada had signed it, he would let Jasodanandan read it. But the point is, there were a number of additional meetings after this one. And in the subsequent meetings, which were held over a span of at least 2 to 3 days, Srila Prabhupada evolved from what started out to, yes, be a system for just the current backlog of present initiations into the final and settled up system that he wanted in place for after he had departed. As we see on this day in July, Tamal has brought up the topic of the current backlog on initiations. And clearly that is what Srila Prabhupada is addressing in this one particular recorded conversation. However, even though a number of other meetings were held that culminated in the July 9th letter, we do not have recorded copies of those meetings. Excuse me, of those meetings. Gauridas says, Gauridas Pandit has told us all along that the other meetings were actually recorded. And he says that those tapes wound up missing. He makes this claim because he said it was his service to make sure the meetings were recorded. Well, at least he said it was his duty to hit the record button. So he says he knows the recordings were made. What happened to them? No one knows. And they have become fodder for so many conspiracy theories. What we do know is that the July 9th letter contains much more information and more detailed information than what was discussed in this first recorded meeting. Srila Prabhupada gave a formal title to those he had selected, calling them formally Rtvik representatives of the Acharya. And very importantly, as I point out, when we get to the July 9th timeline, he gave a very clear and explicit link in the July 9th letter that directly links the Rtvik system outlined in that letter to the May 28th meeting with the GBC and to his promise he gave at that meeting that he would soon select men to act as Rtvik. That link binds the Rtvik system given in the July 9th letter to that promise. And that promise he made as his response to the GBC's question as to how initiations would be conducted after he was no longer present with us. Obviously, this one recorded conversation doesn't tell us the whole story about the July 9th letter. We can't reach final conclusions based only on what was discussed here. Since we don't have the other recordings, we have to use the July 9th letter itself as the additional evidence. Yes, again, it's obvious that in this recording, Srila Prabhupada is speaking only of the backlog of present initiations. But since May 28th, when he had stated that he would soon settle up on what the system he wanted for after he departs. By this date in July, he had not yet fulfilled that promise to do so. It is obvious that over the next day or two, Srila Prabhupada chose to utilize what he had started in selecting men to act in a Ritvik capacity for the current backlog of initiations as the ideal starting point for him to finalize the Ritvik system that he said he would finalize and set up regarding initiations for after he had departed. And thus in the subsequent meetings, His Divine Grace then focused on finalizing that system. Again, back in May, he said that the system for after he departs would be conducted by officiating Rtviks. And now here in July, he had already begun selecting men to act in such a Ritvik capacity for assisting him for the current backlog of initiations. It doesn't take any sort of imagination to conclude that after this recorded conversation, he decided to utilize this as the basis for the Ritvik system that he had not yet settled upon, but yet he still had to finish it. It was then in subsequent meetings that he took the care to dictate and finalize that Ritvik system. It was on April 22nd, 1977, which was just 11 weeks before this conversation, when the very same Tamal Krishna Maharaj informed Srila Prabhupada that he knew that he was a conditioned soul and that all of Srila Prabhupada's disciples were at that time, and that he nor any other of Srila Prabhupada's disciples were yet qualified to become gurus. It was at that time, just 11 weeks before this meeting, that Srila Prabhupada agreed with his assessment. At that time, on April 22nd, Srila Prabhupada said he wanted to appoint gurus, but that he was still waiting to give that order, because before he can do so, the disciples must have fully completed their training. They must be qualified first, meaning they must become topmost Mahabhagavat devotees before he could give such an order. Now here in this meeting, 11 weeks later, let's analyze the process and mood and criteria His Divine Grace is using in the selection of these 11 men. His first criteria was that they be senior sannyasis. However, even then, as he is selecting these men, he names Bhagawan and Jayatirtha, who at the time were married Grihastha family men living with wife and children. Yet they were senior devotees and members of the GBC. In the end, that was the one common criteria, that they were all members of the GBC. The only other real criteria that was their location, where they were located. Why were Jayatirtha, Bhagawan, and Hrtviks added? Because they were the GBC men for East and West Europe, South Africa, etc. Why was Rameshwar added? Because he was on the west coast of America. Why was Hridayananda added? Because he was the GBC for South and Central America. Those were the only reason those men were added to the list of Rtviks. Just because of where they lived, where they served. The goal was to have Ritvik priests spread around the world, such that temple presidents only needed to write to their nearest Ritvik, who would then execute the Ritvik duties of the initiations on Srila Prabhupada's behalf. That is what this conversation, and that is what this process of choosing these 11 men was all about. The criteria for choosing these 11 men had absolutely nothing at all to do with their so-called qualification to act as guru. He was not herein selecting gurus. He was only selecting men who could act in the capacity of a Ritvik priest. And that was all he was selecting. And again, the whole problem goes back to that wretched, flawed, outright misleading, totally incorrect GBC report of the May 28th meeting. On May 28th, when Srila Prabhupada was asked to explain how initiations would be conducted after he is no longer present with us, Srila Prabhupada informed the GBC that he had not yet settled up how that process was to be conducted. But after he had settled this up, he will select some men to act as his officiating Rtviks priests. That was his actual answer to that question. But the totally corrupt GBC report stated that when he was asked this question, Srila Prabhupada said he would soon select some men who would become actual gurus and initiate their own disciples after his disappearance. That was a totally corrupt statement given in that GBC report. It is not at all what Srila Prabhupada had actually said, and it is not at all what he wanted. And it was based on that corrupt and misleading report that the rest of the GBC unknowingly, and in the beginning, for the most part, all of them simply innocently accepted that report and upheld it, because that is what the whole rest of the GBC thought Srila Prabhupada had actually said on May 28th. So when this July 9th letter came out, and they saw that Srila Prabhupada had selected these 11 men, and by the way, they didn't have this recording of this conversation. They didn't know the mood and the exact nature of how Srila Prabhupada selected those 11 men. But when they saw that list of those 11 men, the GBC all reached a totally wrong and corrupt conclusion that the 11 men who Srila Prabhupada had selected there in the July 9th letter were the men that he had supposedly said back in May he would select who would become actual gurus on his disappearance. But the fact of the matter is, he did not say that on May 28th. The GBC report falsely stated that his answer was that he would soon select men, and they would be regular gurus. But that is not what Srila Prabhupada had said. He said he would soon select men who would be his officiating Rtviks, priests. It all goes back to that totally corrupt and wrong GBC report. Again, look at the criteria he used to select these men. He was not selecting these men because he now understood, oh, these men had become fully qualified to become actual gurus. He was not selecting them because he was now satisfied they had fully completed all their spiritual training. He was not selecting them because he was now convinced that these men had reached the true topmost Uttama stage and were now truly Mahabhagavats, who were fully qualified to accept their own disciples. No, not at all. None of these criteria were there in his choice to select these particular men. He was only selecting them because he needed Rtviks priests in different parts of the world. That was all the selection process was about. It was not about gurus. After the GBC men artificially and wrongly propped these men up to such an exalted status, the new next acharyas of our disciplic line, these men took it that they were far more advanced spiritually than all of Srila Prabhupada's other disciples. They and the other GBC members considered that these men had been blessed by Srila Prabhupada with divine potency. Just see how crazy all of this came about. All due to that totally flawed GBC report. It was like a madman's domino show, one domino knocking down the next. The GBC and these men assumed one maddening, totally corrupt idea after the next, all entirely based on that flawed GBC report. They considered, these 11 men considered themselves to be the most exalted of all in ISKCON. They rushed out to have their new Vyasasans carved just slightly lower than those of Srila Prabhupada's. They insisted from the very start that their photos would be placed on the temple altars next to the rest of the disciplic succession. They squabbled about how their Guru Pujas were to be performed. Should they be worshipped should they only be worshipped during Guru Puja and we no longer worship Srila Prabhupada? Or should we now have two Guru Pujas, one for just them and one for Prabhupada? What pada titles should their disciples now lovingly and adoringly call them by? Their whole attention for years was focused on them and how everyone else, the new members especially, but also their own godbrothers, how all of us must now properly worship them and respect them and adore them because Srila Prabhupada had just selected them and not others to be real gurus. They were now divine gurus, and everyone else had to know that and properly respect them. Srila Prabhupada and his position and his own mission was totally and offensively diminished. The GBC and these men now declared that they were the authorized gurus for Srila Prabhupada's mission and not his divine grace. By doing this, they were actually kicking Srila Prabhupada as the rightful guru of his own ISKCON mission out of his mission, as they proclaimed themselves the new gurus for ISKCON and proclaimed that Srila Prabhupada was no longer fit or qualified or authorized by them to act as guru. In essence, this is what their actions resulted in.
And as soon as you learn the Guru Maharaj is there, now I am so advanced that I can kill my Guru and help because. Now I am so advanced that I can kill my Guru and help because. Why did Gauri was fed? Because they tried to become more Guru. Before passing away, he came all directions. And never said that this man should be next after. But these people, just after passing away, they began to fight. Who shall be Asham? That is They never thought why Guru Maharaj gave us instructions of everything, why he did not say that this man. They wanted to create artificially somebody else, and everything failed. They wanted to create artificially somebody else, and everything failed. They did not consider in the common sense that if Guru Maharaj was there to appoint somebody as Acharya, why did he not say? He said so many things. And this point he missed. And this point he missed. The real point. And then he said, let's declare, unfit person, to become Let's declare, unfit person to become Acharya. Then another man comes, So better remain a foolish person perpetually to be directed by Guru Maharaj. That is perfect. And as soon as you learn the Guru Maharaj is there, now I am so advanced that I can kill my Guru and help because. Now I am so advanced that I can kill my Guru and help because.
The GBC members innocently thought that they were carrying out what Srila Prabhupada wanted. But in fact, they were totally corrupting his mission and thwarting his actual desire to remain as the current initiator guru for his mission. They were placing unfit, unqualified men in the role of guru.
They declare unfit person, unfit They declare unfit person to become acharya. Then another man comes,
They were placing unfit, unqualified men in the role of guru, artificially exalting them as being divinely empowered. This is why many of them came crashing down, falling flat on their faces, even literally losing their heads. Well, at the same time, the same GBC denied this rightful position to their own spiritual master, ISKCON's founder Acharya, His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada.
And as soon as he learned the Guru Maharaj is there, now I am so advanced that I can kill my Guru and he'll become.
They removed Srila Prabhupada as ISKCON's authorized guru. They replaced him with men who were not authorized, who were not fit or qualified. They propagated the corrupt idea that Srila Prabhupada was no longer authorized. He was no longer fit. He was no longer qualified to be an initiator guru in his own mission. But only those the GBC have ordained are actually qualified or fit. What a total disaster the last 4 decades have been. Why did Srila Prabhupada select, say, Jayapataka Maharaj? Not because His Divine Grace had recognized that Jayapataka was far more exalted over all his other godbrothers. Not because he recognized that Jayapataka was qualified to now accept tens of thousands of disciples all over the world. He only selected him because he was a GBC from Mayapur, because of where he was located. Srila Prabhupada wanted a Ritvik priest in Mayapur. That's the only reason Jayapataka was selected. And just like all the others, he was only selected to be a Ritvik priest. That was all. Not a big guru who stole tens of thousands of disciples away from his own guru, Srila Prabhupada. So I'm not singling him out for any personal reasons. I'm simply chose him randomly just to illustrate how horribly wrong this whole system has been all these years. Jayapataka was just like the other GBC men. He was under the same illusion. And that was that, like the other GBC men, he had no knowledge that the May 28th GBC report was so corrupt. When the July 9th letter came out, he and the other GBC men concluded that those who were listed in that July 9th letter, according to the May 28th GBC report, they were to become actual gurus, because that's what the GBC report stated. All of them were convinced that this was what Srila Prabhupada had said, and therefore what he wanted. But the fact is, Srila Prabhupada never said that the men he would soon select were to become actual gurus, but instead, he said the men he would soon select would become officiating Ritvik priests only on his order, but by his order when he orders. Those men who he gives such an order to, they will become regular guru. But that was totally separate from those he would soon select to act as officiating Ritvik priests. The GBC report left out on my order, but by my order, when I order, and substituted on his disappearance. Look back at what happened after Srila Prabhupada left this world. The GBC, and again, for the majority, practically if not the whole, all of the GBC members, they had no clue, they had no idea that the May 28th GBC report was so corrupt and flawed. We cannot be harsh on them for having taken the path they took, because for the most part, especially at the beginning, they were innocent. They looked at the report and they innocently reached the conclusion that the men Srila Prabhupada selected in the July 9th letter, that those were the men who the GBC report stated would become actual gurus. And based on that flawed report, the GBC accepted these men, these 11 men, as the first 11 new acharyas. If that report had faithfully conveyed what Srila Prabhupada's actual answer was to the question as how initiations would have been conducted after he was no longer present with us, it would have stated that his divine grace had said that he had not yet settled up how those initiations were to be conducted. But after this is settled up, he will select some men to act as his officiating Rtviks, priests. That is what the report should have said, because that is what his divine grace actually said, and not what the corrupt GBC report said. He said, if that report had stated what Srila Prabhupada actually said, Srila Prabhupada would never have been removed as ISKCON's one and only initiating spiritual master, and none of the Rameshwaras, Jaipatakas, Indradyumnas, Radhanaths, etc., none of them would have ever become gurus within Srila Prabhupada's ISKCON mission. Srila Prabhupada would never have been prevented from rightfully and properly continuing to act as the one and only truly qualified and authorized initiating guru for his own mission. If others become guru, they can only do so by taking leave of Srila Prabhupada's ashram and starting their own separate ashram, just as exactly as Srila Prabhupada had done. As I've said before, no rank and file devotees, no temple presidents, no one had access to all those conversations for many years after Srila Prabhupada departed. Even the GBC members themselves didn't have access to the May 28th meeting recordings for many years. Very early on in 1978, Pradyumna Prabhu complained that what the GBC was doing by elevating these men to the post of gurus was wrong, because he pointed out that they were not actually qualified. And from the start, the GBC didn't tolerate such opposition to the path they had taken. Again, it all goes back to that one report. The GBC thought that the men Prabhupada would soon name were to become actual gurus. That's what the corrupt report stated. That is what the GBC innocently thought Srila Prabhupada wanted. So when devotees humbly spoke up and said this was wrong, the GBC felt that they were obligated to uphold what they mistakenly thought was what Srila Prabhupada really wanted. And so those who spoke up, saying these men were not fit to be elevated to the post of guru, those devotees were totally kicked out of Prabhupada's mission. The GBC considered Prabhupada had selected those men to be actual gurus, and therefore they saw that any belittling of the new gurus was nothing less than Vaishnava aparad against a bona fide acharya in our disciplic line. And thus so many loving disciples of Srila Prabhupada were kicked out of their own guru's mission. Those who had enough knowledge and insight to know that the path the GBC had taken was wrong and spoke up, they were unceremoniously removed from Prabhupada's mission, just as Srila Prabhupada himself was removed as the actual guru of his own mission. That report is what had sent the GBC and sent ISKCON down the wrong path and has turned it totally upside down, inside out, for over 40 years. It is now time to reclaim Srila Prabhupada's mission before all of his direct disciples leave this world. Before we depart, we must do this as our service to Srila Prabhupada. That's why I'm making this presentation, as part of my effort in this way. We must take the needed actions, come together as a family to restore and finally establish the system that His divine grace actually wanted. We must re-establish His divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, as the one and only truly authorized initiating spiritual master for his ISKCON mission. We must all do this cooperatively as our collective duty, and all work together to finally turn Srila Prabhupada's mission upside up We are getting old. Many have already left us. For all of us, our time is limited. We must all come together now, as soon as possible, whatever it takes, and do this for Srila Prabhupada before we're all gone, and it will be too late. As I said, I have added this in after I had already recorded and fixed the rest of the presentation. But I felt it was needed here. The rest of the presentation will give many of these arguments, but please continue on, as we still have a lot more timelines to cover.